My guest this week is Jay Budziszewski. He is a professor of government and philosophy at the University of Texas at Austin and the author of the book, How and How Not to Be Happy. And I wanted to have him on because we hear a lot in the news and in media about anger, about polarization, and with the rise of suicides, opioid overdoses, and mass shootings, and the anger on the internet, there is polarization, but there's something deeper behind it. And very few people are talking about why, in all the polls, in all the surveys, more people are saying that they're anxious or unhappy than ever before. Here is the first segment of our interview. Jay, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, I get a number of correspondence about books, and every once in a while they tend to jump out because I talk a lot about race and culture and the things in the news. And I'm sure people are like, why are you always talking about that? Do you have something else? And here I think I have something that will touch on everyone, more or less.
Okay.
You have something that will. You are the author of a new book called How and How Not to Be Happy.
That's right.
So I think that's important, and it takes some a lot of work, I would think, to really kind of go through this and hash that out. So tell me why you wrote the book and why it was important to delineate how and how not to be happy.
Well, the main reason I wrote the book is that I think that people are not very happy. The level of happiness seems to be going down. Now, I take most statistical studies and surveys of that sort of thing with more than a grain of salt, because the answers that people give depend on the way that you ask the question. But it does seem that no matter how you ask the question, people seem to describe themselves as less happy now than before. Now, what I trust more is just my observations. I talk to my students. I'll ask them something like, well, what is happiness? And of course, on ethics or political philosophy. And sometimes they will tell me it's nothing but the absence of pain. They can't give me a positive element of it at all. They can only tell me what they're trying to escape. They're trying to escape pain and suffering. And I think, wow, these young people are not having a lot of happiness, are they? This is so that's the first reason. Now, the second reason is that when I was a young man, I was desperately unhappy, and I've learned something. Okay. The third reason is that I recently wrote a 660 pages or something book on, it was a line-by-line commentary on the great thinker Thomas Aquinas' theory of happiness. So, and I'm a Thomist. I mean, I think Thomas Aquinas is really great. So I wanted to put all of that in a shorter form and in a way that's accessible to everybody and that everybody can understand.
Wow. So you said something there that made me think. And it's really important about, because obviously all these things run through my mind, but one key thing is talking to your students, and they talk about the absence of pain when you ask them about that. And I'll get to, I know it can be a complicated version, but it's kind of a definition of just simply saying what is happiness. But before I get there, because of what you said, I want to know this. This is a good thing. Do people even know whether they're happy or not? Because I think, like you, as I'm reading the book and I think about what I get from interactions from people, and I hear a lot of the bad. I hear a lot of, man, I'm grumpy today, or man, I'm in a bad mood, or man, this guy pissed me off. So they'll say that often, but you don't really hear people say, I'm really happy, right? So they always seem to point out the bad, and then if they're happy or their things around them are going well, they just live in that moment. They don't really talk about that. So you get so much, and when you ask people, you get a response the same way, right? You get, well, I'm not sick. Well, they keep telling you the opposite of negative. So do they even really know whether they're happy or not? Or do they just know that, I'm not upset today?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I talk about this in the book, too, because I think that, first of all, happiness is not a feeling. But a lot of people think happiness is a feeling, and people don't even always know how they're feeling. You can be in a bad mood. Everybody around you knows it. You're snapping at everybody. You're snarling at your kids and at your coworkers. Everybody around you knows you're in a bad mood, but maybe you don't know it. It can even happen that you're feeling pretty good and you don't know it. Happiness is even more complicated. Sometimes, for example, a married couple years and years into their marriage. They may look back on when they were young and they were having children and they were so busy, they never gave a thought to whether they were happy. But they look back on that and they say, you know, we were happy then, weren't we? But they didn't notice it at the time. So, yeah, I think that being happy and feeling that you're happy and knowing that you're happy are all different things, and people don't always even know.
And then to the definition, you said happiness is not a feeling. So what is happiness?
Happiness is happiness is something that we're doing. Actually, it's an activity of the will. It's what we're doing when we're flourishing, when we're functioning well, when we're thriving. This is the great philosopher Aristotle said that happiness is living well and doing well, and I think that's right.
Okay.
Now, you know, a lot of other things that we say every day, like, oh, it's fulfillment. Well, of course, if you're not fulfilled, you're not happy. If they say pleasure, well, you can be having all kinds of pleasure and not being happy. But it's true that if your life is unremitting pain, you're not happy. These things happen too. Sometimes when people say, what is happiness? They want to know, what kind of thing is it? But sometimes when people say, what is happiness? What they really mean is, what will give me happiness? Will wealth give me happiness? Will pleasure give me happiness? Will having a lot of friends give me happiness? And I deal with both of those things in the book.
Right. Well, is happiness important? And if so, why?
Yeah, I think we all want to be happy. We human beings are magnetized toward the good. Now, you may be wrong about what's good. You may be a thief and you think it's good to steal from somebody else. But even a thief, he's not stealing because he thinks that evil is worthwhile in itself. He thinks that it would be good to have this money. He thinks that wealth is going to give him happiness. It's not even possible to desire to do anything except because it seems good to us and seems to us that it will give us happiness, even if we're mistaken. So this is, whether we're thinking about it or not, this is the abiding concern of human life. Now, don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying that if you obsess and ask yourself constantly, am I happy yet? Am I happy yet? Am I happy yet? I'm not saying that will make you happy. It won't. Right. But we all are concerned about this, even when we're not thinking about it.
So is the problem of happiness, or defining it as we all look at it, the specifics for the people who look at it, happiness as a thing that we can achieve? So if I know what it is, I can achieve it. Isn't the biggest problem with that we all don't have the same definition, right? Different things make different people happy.
Well, we have all these theories, and the theories all have a grain of truth in them. I mean, somebody may think, if I have a lot of money, if I have a lot of wealth, that will make me happy. He's wrong. But like every error, there's got to be a grain of truth in it, or nobody could even be taken in. With a grain of truth is that, look, we have bodies, we have material needs, we've got to be clothed. We've got to have food. I've got to be able to put a roof over the heads of my wife and children. We do have material needs. Now, so people leap to the conclusion, oh, having all that material stuff will make me happy. No, you need that stuff. But it's not the case that more and more will make you happier and happier. In fact, there's a limit beyond which, if you have too much, it's actually going to interfere with your happiness. Aristotle, I mentioned him before, Aristotle remarked that having too much good fortune, and he meant things like wealth, having too much good fortune might almost be defined as bad fortune. And we know how that's true. Somebody wins the lottery and his life goes to pieces. He cannot deal with this. Now, or another thing that people will think, they think love is all there is. All I need is a lot of friends. And that doesn't make them happy. Sure, it's a contributor to their happiness, but it doesn't just completely fulfill them, and their friends' disappoint them, and then they go to the opposite extreme and think, I don't need people. They burn out and become bitter and cynical. All of these mistakes, happiness is friends, happiness is having meaning, happiness is having wealth, happiness is having power, happiness is having this, happiness is having that. There's a grain of truth in every one of them that makes it plausible, but they're all in the end wrong. You may need some of that stuff, but it's not the same as saying that's what happiness is. But that's why people fall into those mistakes. It's because of these grains of truth.
Coming up, more with Jay Budziszewski, author of How and How Not to Be Happy. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
We return to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer. Once again, here's Charles Love.
Are you tired of summer nights in May?
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Jay Budziszewski. He is a professor of government and philosophy at the University of Texas at Austin and the author of the book, How and How Not to Be Happy. And in the last segment, he was kind of setting up the book, explaining why he wrote it, why happiness is important, and the definition of happiness. Just tries to explain what happiness is. And in this segment, we talk about the second section of the book, where he kind of compares supreme happiness to what he calls imperfect happiness, kind of like a facsimile of actual happiness. So he talks about things like wealth, health, fame, virtue, and all these things people use as a substitute for happiness. And I think the one common denominator between all of them is that you need these things to a point. So there's a point to which without them, you feel lost, you struggle in life, but then you reach a point of comfort, and any more of those items, it's just fluff. It doesn't bring any additional happiness. And in this section, we talk about that and why people know that they can't get true happiness from these things, yet they still spend a lot of time trying to achieve them. Right, and talk about those. Talk about the things that you say, because you write a chapter on each of those things you talk about, like the money and the fame and the health and that. Mm-hmm. So why people think those things will lead to happiness, and what's missing in those? I think you gave, some kind of examples, but why? So are you saying that happiness is not impossible, but difficult without a base level amount of these things, right? So it's hard to be happy if you have no money and you are in terrible health and you have none of this stuff, but
it's hard.
Having it doesn't mean that you're
It's hard, although I'll tell you, a person of good character is in, that's even better than having all those other things, because a person of good character is in a better position to be able to weather adversity and to deal with not having things, and to know that what he really has to base his life on is something other than that stuff that he doesn't have. But sure, I do need some of those things, a certain base. It's not unreasonable to say, it would be foolish to say to somebody who's in stark poverty and who doesn't even have enough to eat and he's wasting away, to say money won't buy happiness. What he needs to be able to eat. All right. That's absolutely true. We just have to not go crazy over that and think, oh, having all the food in the world is going to make me happy. Having all the money to buy all the food in the world, or to go to expensive restaurants and show off with my friends, or have a big house, that'll make me happy. That's the wrong conclusion to draw from that true fact.
So the book is, again, How and How Not to Be Happy. So I guess focusing on these things would be some of the ways not to be happy?
Absolutely. Yeah, I give examples of that. I mean, look, for example, we are social beings. It is true that we need other people. We're not like barnacles, that live a solitary life. We, for human beings, for people of our kind, irrational creatures of our sort, the good life isn't even the good life unless we can share it with others. And since we're social beings, we care what those others think about us. We want them to notice us. We want to be approved. That's a true, this is all true, but it leads to one of the big mistakes, that being noticed is the key to happiness. I've got to be famous. Everybody's got to watch me. And so you've got these spectacles of people ruining themselves, living blisteringly unhappy lives, of doing things like taping videos on YouTube of themselves riding naked on wrecking balls and mouthing the words, "Pay attention to me." And then these same people we have telling people on subsequent YouTube videos, begging their fans to stop pestering them and paying so much attention to them, because being under scrutiny all the time is making them unhappy. They aren't drawing the conclusion. They know they know at some level that they're unhappy, and they keep doing the wrong things. They keep doing the things that make them unhappy. This is one of the funniest things about human beings. We all know something. We're not stupid. And the method of the book is connecting the dots, taking these little things that we all really know, but that we maybe don't notice that we know, and putting them together. But it is amazing how long we can go without putting them together, and how long we can go telling ourselves that we don't know things that we really do, or trying not to pay attention to things that we know because if we took them seriously, we'd have to change our lives. This is a disappointing fact about human beings, but it's the way that it is, and we have to work with that. So that's another reason.
That's interesting too, because I mean, there are countless. You couldn't count all the books and the movies about this. You talk about us knowing this. I mean, we enjoy going to theaters to watch the guy who's poor, hope that he's successful, say he wants to get all this money, and he's like, yeah, just enough to have a comfortable life, and then he doesn't stop, right? What's the movie? I keep saying President, but it's not All the King's Men, right? Where he's like, you got the local guys. It's like, I see this corruption. Just if I was in office, I can fix a lot of things, and then they become a corrupt politician themselves. So we know it, right? We write stories and we read stories about it all the time. Yeah, but we know it. But I won't be the one, right? I will do it right.
I'll do it right. Yeah. So what I try to do is call attention. You might say that my method is calling attention to the obvious, saying, have you noticed such and such? If somebody says, oh yeah, I knew that all the time, I'm not going to consider myself a failure because he knew it all the time. I'm going to consider that a success because I called it to his attention. He didn't notice that he knew it. Now he notices. Now you can do something with that. That's the idea.
Well, isn't that kind of the situation to shift just slightly on the off-ramp from happiness that we're in today in our culture, right? Because we have serious, issues that we want to fix, right? It's like, this is a bad thing. People shouldn't be racist. Let's make them not racist. People shouldn't kill people. Let's make them stop killing. And then we overcorrect, right? We say, let's just fix human nature and ignore that some people are going to be bad. And if we just had the right people telling you to not do this bad thing that has been happening since humans have walked the earth, we can stop them from doing it. And then you sit back and you watch them and you see the results. You're like, well, I knew that was going to happen.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. We tend to skate from one side from one extreme to the other extreme. C.S. Lewis made an interesting remark about this once. He said it's as though you're on a ship and it's sinking. Your problem is too much water, but everybody screams, "Fire! Fire! Turn on the water hoses." We misidentify the problem. We think we're at one extreme, when we're really at the other extreme. And so we pile on even more and bring ourselves to ruin. Yeah, so it's possible to get into a middle position. It takes work. It's possible to avoid opposite extremes, but it takes work.
One of the most interesting parts of the book is the intro, because you talk about not writing this to try to prove anything. And you kind of play... you do it at other points in the book too, but it's interesting, it's most prevalent there, where you're saying, now I know some people are going to say this, and to that, they have some bit of truth in it. However, for the guy who says this is happiness, this is that problem, or the person who says this, so talk a bit about the back and forth between, I know what the naysayers will say, and let me address that.
Yeah. Well, that's right. I want to approach this book in the spirit of a dialogue, of a conversation. People people who are confused or who are unhappy or who think they're sure that I'm wrong, I want to engage with them. I want to try to find what's true in what they think and build on that and help them to get rid of what isn't. Look, I need that too. I need people to do that for me. And I've been the beneficiary all my life of people pointing out, don't you know better than that? Here, look, have you noticed that you think this, but you're really saying this other thing? Or you say that you want to choose this, but you're living in a way like you're choosing something else. They call this to my attention. I become a little wiser. Well, okay, I've depended on this kind of conversation. Philosophy is that kind of conversation too, but it's going on at a higher level. And that's right. I even want to take my critics seriously. I want to give them respect and learn from them if I can and try to offer something that they can learn.
Coming up, more with Jay Budziszewski, author of How and How Not to Be Happy. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Jay Budziszewski, author of How and How Not to Be Happy. And in this segment, we talk about Stoicism. When listing the group of items that people think make happiness, one of the important things he mentioned was virtue. And he says virtue is important, but the Stoics took it to the point that they thought virtue was the most important thing and in itself could bring you happiness, but didn't like the pesky feelings and desires and thought that supplanted that happiness. And so here we talk about that and why that is not the key to happiness.
The Stoics were mostly unhappy people. They were like Mr. Spock in the first generation Star Trek, no emotions. They thought that emotions would make you unhappy, that passions were like diseases of the soul that would infect you. So that instead of joy, they wanted to feel a constant state that they called gladness. Instead of fear, they wanted to have a constant state that they called caution. And they thought that the key to happiness was just practicing virtue, period. Now, I want to hand it to them. Virtue is really important. Without virtue, you're not going to be happy. You're not going to have any happiness at all, because even the good fortune that comes your way, you're not going to know what to do with it. And when bad fortune comes your way, you're just going to crash. But they thought all you needed was virtue. So on one occasion, one of these Stoics is talking with his friend, and he says, "Yes, virtue is all you need." His friend says, "So if you're virtuous and you're being tortured and you're on the rack, they're twisting off your arms, they're burning you with hot pokers, then you're going to be happy?" And he says, "Yes." Well, that's naive. That's naive. When the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who was a Stoic, suffered the loss of his daughter, whom he loved, he tries to tell himself it doesn't matter. He tries not to feel the feelings. He tries to tell himself it's just the way of the universe. He tells himself if he grieves over this, he'll just be like an abscess on the universe, a wound, a sore, and he doesn't want to be like this. I think behind this view of happiness was really despair and pride, because when these people said external things I'm a fortress, I'm a rock, these external things will not affect me. Those external things, in their view, even included friends. They said the reason that you can do without your friends and be happy even then is that you don't need them. That's not happy. That's not a view toward happiness. That's a view toward despair and solitary pride, and it seems to me to be living in a kind of a hell. So the credit I give the Stoics is that more than almost anybody else in the history of philosophy, they took virtue really seriously. Good. You've got to have good character. You've got to practice the virtues. You've got to work on them. But they twisted the understanding of virtue, and they thought that that's all you need. And it's naive to think that you don't need some good fortune too. That if your arm's being twisted off, that you can still be deliriously happy. That's just nuts. Now you notice this brings us to a kind of a view of happiness I like to call it the worldly wise man's view of happiness. It's an improvement on the Stoics. You say, happiness is virtue and plus luck. You need to have good character, but you need to have some good fortune too. Now, that's not a bad answer. What's wrong with it is that it will leave you wanting something more. Because even if you have good character and good fortune, there is something that human beings are made to long for, which is not found in anything in nature, anything in the created world. And I talk about that in the book too, but I don't want to get off the top.
No, that's fine. But one last thing, I was going to get to that. So you're guiding me along. But one last thing about the Stoic approach is it's kind of like it also leaves one other thing. So you're talking, I guess it could help in theory. The virtue is important, like you say, but it could also help in theory in that when things are bad, you're like, like the child dying or being on the rack, you're like, well, you no emotion, you just move forward and deal with it. But then if they found out that magic formula and they achieved happiness, right? These are still humans, right? It's also not allowing you to accept the happiness that you claim you're achieving, because you would have an emotional response to this happiness. So even if you achieve the happiness, you would close it off outside of the fortress. So you would not it's like the closed hand, right? You also get happiness in there.
That's right. If your hand is closed so that no suffering can get in, it's also closed so that no joy can get in. I think that the right attitude to take toward emotion is that it's normal to have emotions, and virtue, good character, means, among other things, it means having the right emotions in the right ways, at the right times, toward the right people, in the right degree, and for the right reasons. It doesn't mean not having these emotions, so that I should grieve if my daughter dies. There'd be something wrong with me if I can't. But on the other hand, I have to, even there, I have to moderate that there is a time to stop grieving. You don't completely ever get over that entirely, but there's a time to set things aside and get on with life. And I don't have to think this is the end of the world. I am still here, and it is no tribute to a dead daughter that now I'm going to commit suicide or something.
Coming up, more with Jay Budziszewski, author of How and How Not to Be Happy. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, more of The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Jay Budziszewski, author of How and How Not to Be Happy. And in this segment, he talks about what he thinks is most important. He made it a point in the preface to separate, religion and the ideology and beliefs from, those secular ideas of happiness, and said that there's something in this book for everyone. But here he makes it clear that he thinks God, the ultimate authority and the creator, is the key to happiness.
Religion and God is a funny way to put it, because I never know what people mean by religion. I read a book by a sociologist who went around interviewing people about this and that. And he interviewed a young woman. He called her Sheila. That was a false name. And she said that her personal religion was a Sheilaism. She was her own God. Well, okay, that's a religion, but it's not going to give you happiness. I think there is a real God, and we long for him. We will not be satisfied until we are satisfied in him. And, here's the kicker. That satisfaction won't come entirely. We won't be completely fulfilled until and unless we see him face to face. And that doesn't happen in this life. So sometimes people of my own faith, I'm Christian, they will come to me and they say, well, I go to church and I worship and I pray and I do all this stuff. I say, great. And they say, but I'm still not fulfilled. What's wrong with me? And I would say, what do you mean? What's wrong with you? This is something right with you. If you were just evolved mud, you would be adapted perfectly to this universe, this universe, and you would be satisfied. You'd be satisfied with this meal and this mate and this warm place to sleep, and you wouldn't long for anything else that you can't find in creation. The fact that you long for that is because you were made for something else that transcends this order of reality, and that's God. So you weep. Therefore, you should rejoice.
And then, obviously, like I said in the intro, you gave them something to say. Even if you aren't a believer and don't believe in God, there's still a reason why your approach, the things that you say are important, and the things necessary for happiness don't change. So what does the atheist or the agnostic person take from this and learn that they can find happiness from?
The God stuff I don't talk about until the very end of the book. As a matter of fact, I even promise readers who are God-phobic, let's say, at the beginning, I even promise them at the beginning of the book, look, if you don't want to have to deal with any of that stuff, you don't, because it doesn't come up until the last few chapters. I go through the vast bulk of the book talking about things that you ought to be able to agree with me about too. What is true, but also what is phony about the idea that happiness lies in wealth? What's true, but also what's misleading about the idea that we can find happiness in friends? Those are things that anybody can agree with. The idea that you need good character, but you also need a certain measure of good fortune, and too much so-called good fortune really becomes bad fortune. Those are things that the atheist who doesn't want to go with me with this God stuff and ask that question, those are things that he can agree with me about too. So I think that 3/4 of the book, 4/5 of the book, the atheist, the agnostic is going to be able to get a lot out of. I would only say to him that it's kind of like you reading a mystery story and then not reading the solution to the mystery in the very end, because you say, well, I'm not the sort of person who enjoys the solutions to mysteries.
Right. So you started out the conversation by saying you wrote the book because you found that people just weren't happy. Every time they do a study, it says that, but you didn't just, you took that with a grain of salt, but then you did other research, still not happy. So why is this such a big problem? I mean, I'm sure it always has been a lack of happiness, but why are so many people unhappy?
Well, that's a hard one. I think there are reasons that are permanent reasons, but they don't explain why we're less happy now than we have been in other times. And then there are also reasons that have to do with us. The permanent reasons have to do with the fact that we're alienated from the very source of meaning, and we're broken. We need help. We need grace. We can't fix ourselves. We're kind of like imagine a surgeon who's terrific at. He's a hand surgeon. He's really great, and his hands get cut off. Well, he can't sew his own hands back on, and we're sort of in that position. We can't fix ourselves. Those are the permanent reasons. But the temporary reasons have to do with the fact that we're living in very unnatural ways of life. We try to pursue our relationships in unnatural ways, like the hookup culture. Human beings, among other things, are sexual beings. That kind of sexuality is just a recipe for misery and despair. And in fact, the studies even confirmed this. People don't report themselves happy as a result of that. They cut themselves. They do drugs. They punish themselves. They live futility, or we have a materialistic culture. Since it's now sort of politically incorrect to talk about anything beyond the material world, we try to find all our satisfactions in the material world. And so, of course, we're going to think, if I have a big house and 6 cars and an Olympic-sized swimming pool, or maybe 2 of them, hey, why not? Then I'm going to be happy. Of course. And when that happiness doesn't come through material things, or even through, in one sense of the term, spiritual things like friendship, meaning, even then we're sort of lost.
Coming up, my final segment with Jay Budziszewski, author of How and How Not to Be Happy. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
The Charles Love Show continues on AM 560, The Answer. Here's Charles Love.
Welcome back. I've reached my final segment with Jay Budziszewski, professor of government and philosophy at the University of Texas at Austin, and author of How and How Not to Be Happy. In the final segment, he continues to explain why we can't achieve true happiness on our own, and I asked him to explain what he wants people to take away from the book.
Even meaning, we do need meaning. Human beings want to know what everything is all about. We have rational minds. We can't not want to know that. We're not just like monkeys, but more clever. No, we're a different kind of being because the monkey doesn't ever ask, what is it all about? What does everything mean? And we do. We want to know. But people sometimes say, well, I need meaning. And they don't mean the true meaning. They just mean I can make up some meaning for myself. And that doesn't work either. There was a years ago, I read an article, an interviewer had gone out. He was researching 12-step groups, like Alcoholics Anonymous, Cocaine Users Anonymous, very great things, these 12-step groups. But, one of the steps is we realized that we couldn't deal with our problem on our own. We didn't have the power and we had to turn ourselves over to a higher power. So he would go to these people in these 12-step groups and he'd say, well, for you, what's the higher power? And some of them said, well, God. Some said my inner goddess. Some said it's the power of the group. One guy said, well, for me, the higher power is electricity. This is a relativism of meaning. Meaning's great, but it's got to be the meaning that is true. Just cooking up something is not going to make you happy. And so is because we don't want to ask the truth question, we inevitably get into troubles like this.
How do we achieve happiness?
I would say if you want the fragmentary and incomplete happiness that is available just in this life by your own powers, which is nothing to sneeze at, okay? Then I would say cultivate the virtues and hope for good fortune. If you want that complete and consuming happiness that leaves nothing further to be desired, and that we were made for, then I think that you have to turn your eyes upward and look to the one who created this universe that we're in.
And lastly, what would you want those to learn and take away from the book?
This is a really important goal of the book. I don't want people to despair. A lot of people say, you gotta settle. You can't ever be happy. You won't be happy. I've even had people get angry with me sometimes when I say it's possible to be happy. They say, no, you can't. They grit their teeth. They yell at me because they've burned out. And they think that they will be happier if they stop trying. Mm-hmm. Well, I do think that we're happier if we don't obsess. Obsessing over happiness will not make you happy. But you do have to believe that it's possible and not give up. It is possible. So that's part of the book, too.
Another good thing about the book is when you described why we're unhappy today, a lot of it seemed to boil down when you were describing. I'm listening, I'm looking at the chapters on all these mistakes that people make. And it sounds like just heavy focus and belief in the opposite of what you're writing. Belief that money, that wealth, that fame, that power, that self-esteem will make you happy. So they should get this book. If for nothing else, like you say, aside from religion and the importance of God, which is, highly important, the most important, but if they don't believe that, they can read these chapters on money and health and fame and power and understand why focusing on that will just make you less happy. But thank you. It's been a great conversation. He is Jay Budziszewski, author of How and How Not to Be Happy. Jay, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me on your podcast.